Rodney James Alcala was born Rodrigo Yaquez Alcala Bucor in San Antonio, Texas, to Raul Alcala Bucor and Ana Maria Gutierrez. He and his sisters were raised by his mother in suburban Los Angeles. His father abandoned the family. He joined the United States Army in 1960, where he served as a clerk. In 1964, after what was described as a nervous breakdown, he was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder by a military psychiatrist and discharged on medical grounds. Alcala, who claimed to have a genius-level IQ, graduated from the UCLA School of Fine Arts after his medical discharge from the Army, and later attended New York University using the alias John Berger. Or is it Berger? I'm going to go Berger. John Berger, where he studied film under Roman Polanski. Alcala committed his first known crime in 1968. A motorist in Los Angeles witnessed him luring an 8-year-old girl named Tali Shapiro into the Hollywood apartment and called the police. The girl was found in the apartment. She had been abused and beaten with a steel bar, but Alcala escaped. He fled to the East Coast and enrolled in NYU Film School using the name John Berger. During the summer months, he also obtained a counseling job at a New Hampshire arts camp for children using a slightly different name, John Berger. In 1971, after two campers noticed Alcala's FBI wanted poster at the post office and notified camp directors, he was arrested and extradited back to California. By then, however, Tali Shapiro's parents had relocated her family to Mexico and refused her to testify at Alcala's trial. Unable to convict him of rape and attempted murder without their primary witness, prosecutors were forced to permit Alcala to plead guilty to a lesser charge. He was paroled after 34 months in 1974 under the indeterminate sentencing program popular at the time, which allowed parole boards to release offenders as soon as they demonstrated evidence of rehabilitation. Less than 2 months later, Alcala was arrested for violating parole and providing marijuana to a 13-year-old girl who claimed she had been kidnapped. Once again, he was paroled after serving 2 years of an indeterminate sentence. In 1977, despite his criminal record and official registration as a sex offender, he was hired as a typesetter by the Los Angeles Times in the midst of their coverage of the Hillside Strangler murders. During this period, Alcala also convinced dozens of young women that he was a professional fashion photographer and photographed them for his portfolio. Most of those photos remain unidentified, and police fear that some of the women may have been additional victims. Robin Samso, a 12-year-old girl from Huntington Beach, California, disappeared somewhere between the beach and her ballet class on June the 20th, 1979. Her decomposing body was found 12 days later in the foothills of Los Angeles. Police subsequently found her earrings in a Seattle locker rented by Alcala. In 1980, Alcala was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death for Samso's murder, but his conviction was overturned by the California Supreme Court because the Orange County Superior Court trial judge had allowed the jury to hear about the Tali Shapiro case and Alcala's other rape and kidnapping convictions. In 1986, he was convicted for a second time and again sentenced to death, but a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals panel overthrew his conviction once again, in part because a witness was not allowed to support Alcala's contention that the park ranger who found Samso's body had been hypnotized by police investigators. While preparing their third prosecution in 2003, Orange County investigators learned that Alcala's DNA, sampled under a new state law over his objections, matched semen left at the rape murder scenes of 2 women in Los Angeles. Another pair of earrings found in Alcala's storage locker matched the DNA of one of the 2 victims. Additional evidence, including another cold case DNA match in 2004, led to Alcala's indictment for the murders of the 4 additional women. Jane Bart. In 2003, prosecutors entered a motion to join the Samso charges with those of the 4 newly discovered victims. Alcala contested the motion. In 2006, the California Supreme Court ruled in the prosecution's favor, and in 2009, Alcala stood trial once again. At the third trial, Alcala acted as his own attorney and told jurors, often in a rambling monotone, that he was at Knott's Berry Farm when Samso was kidnapped. He offered no defense of any kind in any of the other 4 cases. As part of his closing argument, he played the portion of Arthur Guthrie's song Alice's Restaurant, in which the protagonist tells the psychiatrist he wants to kill. He was convicted on all 5 counts. A surprise witness during the penalty phase of the trial was Talia Shapiro, Alcala's first known victim. In March 2010, Alcala was finally sentenced to death for the 3rd time. Alcala continues to maintain his innocence and currently remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison. But back in 1978, Alcala, who had by then already killed at least 2 women, was accepted as a contestant on the dating game, despite being a convicted rapist and registered sex offender. Host Jim Lange introduced him as, and I quote, a successful photographer who got his start when his father found him in the dark room at the age of 13. Fully developed. Between takes you might find him skydiving or motorcycling. He won a date with bachelorette Cheryl Bradshaw, who subsequently refused to go out with him, according to published reports, because she found him, quote, creepy. Jed Mills, an actor who sat next to Alcala on stage as Bachelor 2, later described him as a very strange guy with bizarre opinions. The 3rd contestant hasn't publicly commented, but I'm pretty sure they probably felt the same way. In April 2010, the Huntington Beach Police Department made public 120 of Alcala's photographs in an effort to identify some of the women and determine if anyone could be an additional victim. Anyone willing to provide information about any of the photos was asked to call Detective Patrick Ellis at 714-536-5971, and in the first few weeks, approximately 20 women had come forward to identify themselves. Charles Cullen is a convicted angel of death type serial killer, stalker and poisoner, and the most prolific serial killer in New Jersey history. Cullen, born in West Orange, New Jersey, is the youngest of 8 children. 2 of those children later died, and they were from a working-class family. His father, who worked as a bus driver, was 56 at the time of Cullen's birth. He died on September 17, 1960, when he was only 7 months old. His mother was a housewife. 2 of his siblings died young in adulthood. Charles cared for one of them, and at the mere age of 9, he tried to kill himself by drinking chemicals from a chemistry set. That was the first time of his 20 attempts on his own life. On December 6, 1977, his mother died in a car accident during which one of his sisters was behind the wheel, leading him to dropping out of high school. In April the following year, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy and was assigned to the submarine corps. He served on the USS Woodrow Wilson, an attack submarine armed with Poseidon missiles, and eventually became a petty officer, 3rd class. He liked to assist the ship's doctor with vaccinations and once served a shift dressed in surgical clothing and latex gloves that he had stolen from the medical cabinet. He was transferred to the USS Canopus, a supply ship, and he spent the rest of his time in the Navy there. On March 30th, 1984, he was medically discharged and then enrolled in the Mountainside Hospital School of Nursing in Glenridge, New Jersey. In 1987, he married one Adrienne Taub, with whom he had 2 daughters. In 1988, Cullen got his first hospital job at the burn unit of the St. Barnaby's Medical Center. He later told homicide detectives Dan Baldwin and Tim Brown that he committed the first of his many murders that he could even remember there. The victim being Judge John Yengo Sr., who had been admitted to the hospital after suffering an allergic reaction to blood-thinning medicine. He quit working there in 1992, when the hospital management began noticing the contaminated IV bags and began working at the Warren Hospital in Phillipsburg. In January the next year, his wife filed for divorce, having reported him twice for domestic violence. 2 months later, he broke into the apartment of a nurse that he had dated. After being arrested, he pleaded guilty to trespassing and received 1 year's probation. Though he wanted to quit working as a nurse, he had to continue to afford the child support he had to pay. In spite of his odd employment record, he had no problems finding work due to a nationwide lack of nurses. Another reason was that at the time, there was no form of registry that kept track of the nurses with mental health problems. He quit his job at the Warren Hospital and began working at the intensive care/cardiac care unit of Huntington Medical Center in Flemington, where he killed at least 5 people during his last 9 months of employment. He then briefly worked at Morristown Memorial Hospital, but was fired in August 1997 for poor performances and found a job at Liberty Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in Allentown, Pennsylvania. As the years passed by, his debts mounted, in part because he was unable to pay his child support. In May of 1998, he finally had to file for bankruptcy. Over the course of the next 2 years, Cullen worked at 3 different hospitals. There were no suspicions that he was a killer until a co-worker of his at St. Barnabas Hospital in Allentown, Pennsylvania, found a stash of unused medications in a trash can. It was considered suspicious because the drugs had no recreational use or value outside of the hospital. Cullen was identified as the thief and was fired in June 2002. An investigation into the many deaths that occurred on Cullen's watch was started by the Lehigh County District Attorney's Office, with some other nurses with whom Cullen worked with as witnesses. Though he had been present at over 50% of the deaths and only worked 20% of the available hours, no background check on him was done and the investigation was shut down after 9 months due to lack of evidence. Cullen then got a nursing job at the critical care unit of the Somerset Medical Center in Somerville, New Jersey. He committed most of his confirmed murders there. In 2003, his criminal behaviour became increasingly apparent. He would look into the records of patients he wasn't treating and would administer to the patients drugs which they had not been prescribed. In July the same year, the hospital was notified by the director of the New Jersey Poison Information and Education System that there had been some suspicious overdoses, suggesting that the Angel of Death was active at the hospital. The management of which failed to report the case to the authorities before October, by which time more people had been killed by Cullen. On October 31st, he was fired for lying in his job application. On December 12th, Cullen was arrested following a 2-month-long investigation of him by the authorities. He was charged with the murder of Reverend Florian and the attempted murder of Jin Kyung Han. Cullen didn't make any resistance at all, and not only pleaded guilty to both counts, but confessed to several more murders during his past hospital jobs. In April and July of 2004, he confessed to a total of 29 murders and 6 attempted murders, though he admitted he couldn't remember all of his murders. It is very possible that he has in fact killed many, many more. Some place his total number of murders at over 400. He avoided the death penalty through a plea bargain with the prosecution and is currently serving a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole at the New Jersey State Prison in Trenton, New Jersey. His killings and the fact that he was able to move from hospital to hospital without raising any suspicion also had an impact on the US legal system regarding hospitals. The penalties for hospitals for failing to report suspicious fatalities became harsher. Hospitals that report poor staff performance now have better legal defence options, and hospital workers are now required to undergo background checks for criminal records and also to register their fingerprints. Cullen targeted patients at hospitals of which he worked, and most of his victims were no younger than in their 60s. He killed them by poisoning their IV bags, usually with insulin or epinephrine. During interrogation, Cullen claimed to have killed his victims to keep them from getting coded, a reference to Code Blue, a hospital term for cardiac arrest. He felt that if they had, they would have become dehumanized. He also felt that the hospital's managements were to blame for many of his murders, arguing that they should have stopped him from killing when they had the chance. He also claimed, like many angels of death, that he killed his victims in order to put them out of their suffering.